An insane wine auction record was set when a bottle of $5 wine auctioned for the equivalent of almost $5,000 in South Africa in 2018. Now, admittedly, while the wine does retail for $5 currently, it was the 1957 vintage that fetched the auction record, so it was nearly 60 years old at the time of the auction. It's also worth noting that this bottle, the Chateau Libertas 1957 red blend, was the first South African wine ever to receive a perfect 100 points from an international judge. So you can kind of see where that inflation crept in. Perhaps what's even cooler to note is that Chateau Libertas is the only South African producer in existence that is allowed to keep the word Chateau on the label, and they have the official French blessing, because really Chateau Libertas existed before the French AOC laws even came into being. It's also pretty cool to note that the original vintage of Chateau Libertas back in 1932 was only the second dry red blend to exist in South Africa. It came just a few years behind the Alto Rouge red blend, which was for sale only in the United Kingdom. But Chateau Libertas is the wine in South Africa that gets to hold on to the record title of having the longest run of uninterrupted vintage releases in South Africa. As of 2024, they had 91 vintage releases, and this is really because Alto Rouge had only been on sale in Britain and only started selling in South Africa in 1933. And why are we talking about historic Stellenbosch red blends? Well, it's because today's Hand Drink Solo wine of the day is the first official estate release of the Reserve Red Blend by Mulderbosch. It uses fruit all from Mulderbosch estate in the Poker Dry, which is awarded in Stellenbosch, and it is vinified by the cellarmaster Henry Kotzé. Mulderbosch as an estate was only established in 1989. But for an estate that has been around for less than one generation, it's managed to make a huge amount of history for itself. It was first founded by winemaker Mike Dobrovic and his partner Larry Jacobs. And the name Mulderbosch is a portmanteau of Mulder, which was Dr. Larry Jacobs' life partner, Dr. Mulder, and Bosch from the town of Stellenbosch. In the 1980s in South Africa, making wine was a difficult thing to do properly because there were really stringent controls put in place by the government that said that every grape farmer had to take their grapes and send them off to a centralized co-op that would then make a sort of generic regional blend, as they often do in Burgundy, for example. But what had happened in 1973 was that they'd allowed a very special little caveat where grape farms could apply for estate permits, and this would allow them to keep their fruit and bottle it on the estate. Mike Dobrovic knew that the land he had in Mulderbosch was really special, and so he was keen to bypass that system and get his estate license as quickly as possible. And so he did so, and was able to release a Sauvignon Blanc and a Chardonnay, which is why you might see on the bottle mise en bouteille à la propriété, as you can see on some fancier French wines as well. Now, at the time of the release of their very first Sauvignon Blanc, the famous John Platter wine guide declared Mulderbosch's Sauvignon Blanc to be the most celebrated South African Sauvignon Blanc in existence. And at the same time, Mike Dobrovic's hard work started to become quite well known, to the point where he had developed a bit of a legend around himself and was known by his peers as Mr. Sauvignon. So between his personal reputation and all the accolades from Platter, it was really no surprise to note how Mulderbosch's brand exploded on the international scene and their sales skyrocketed in foreign markets. An interesting little historical sidestep in the fact that despite Mike Dobrovic being known as Mr. Sauvignon, probably his most historical winemaking move involved Chenin Blanc. Because Mike Dobrovic was the first South African winemaker ever to make the rather financially risky decision to mature Chenin Blanc in French oak barrels. It was risky because at the time, Chenin Blanc was really respected as little more than a convenient grape that was good for distilling. And so putting them in an expensive French oak barrel seemed like a silly thing to do. And yet, that little move was not only the birth of Mulderbosch's famous Steen-op-Hout Chenin bottling, and by the way, it's so famous now that they don't even put the name Chenin Blanc on the label because the name of Steen-op-Hout has kind of surpassed the category. It's kind of like when Starbucks took the word Starbucks off their logo because they were such a big deal. But aside from launching Steen-op-Hout, it also set in motion the first little ripples in South African winemaking that would eventually grow into this tsunami that was the South African Chenin Blanc revolution. And as I said, this revolution took Chenin Blanc is a grape in South Africa, which was seen as really just a distilling grape option that could feed into the brandy industry, and turned it into what is today South Africa's poster child cultivar or calling card that really proves South Africa's ability to produce some of the finest dry white wines in the entire world. You might ask at this point, why are we talking all about the white wines when we're drinking red wine? And it's fair to say that Mulderbosch's history making and pioneering really did all involve their white wines: Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, and Chardonnay. But that was before they had an insane talent like Henry Kotzé on their team. In a previous life, Henry Kotzé was the cellarmaster at an estate called Morgenster in the Helderberg. Now, Morgenster has a decades-long history of producing incredibly high-quality and award-winning Bordeaux blends, working with cultivars like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. So really, it shouldn't have come as too much of a surprise when Henry moved to Mulderbosch that they released a single cultivar Cabernet Franc from estate fruit, which in turn went on to win a Platter 5-star award. And straight after that, out came the inaugural Cabernet Franc-led Bordeaux-style red blend that was labeled as the Estate Reserve Red Blend for the first time in Mulderbosch's history. But as we said before, you can't drink history, so let's get into the glass and see what we find. When we give this wine a sniff, well, I mean, it really is rather classic, and that's what we've come to expect from Henry when he works with Bordeaux cultivars, because you have your deeper elements of black currant and black cherry, but then, thanks to the Cabernet Franc, there are lighter, redder notes too, a little bit of raspberry sherbet and some cherry candy. But probably most importantly for me is those savory roasted bell pepper notes, which really elevate the aromas to the next level. And that should not be confused with raw green pepper notes. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the difference between raw and roasted, well then, sniff some capsicum raw before you put it on an oven tray, and then roast that capsicum and smell it again afterwards, after you've now built up some of those amino or protein based, and then also those hints of smoke that come from the caramelization process. It's a whole different ballgame. Now, when we give this wine a sip, well, it really is still quite tight, and I suspect that this wine is going to open up a lot in the next 10 years because the structure and the fruit are really quite beautiful. But what you do get, you drink it now, is a lot of the fresher, vibrant, redder fruit notes. There are these lovely red cherry fruit elements, almost like you can feel the cherry fruit between your teeth, but there are also deeper blackcurrant fruits which add a whole nother layer to the wine. As we said, the wine is Cabernet Franc-led, and so what you get is a lot of the redder fruit and even those floral hints, and really it brings with it a sense of elegance that perhaps a Cabernet Sauvignon blend might not have been able to achieve. As mentioned, the tannins are still quite firm on this guy, so if you are going to drink it now, then serve it with some protein, but I think this is also going to cellar quite beautifully for the next decade or so. And if you're just getting to grips with what real quality premium red blends can taste like when coming from Stellenbosch, I've left a video to 2 more links that talk a little bit about what Stellenbosch winemakers are doing with Cabernet Sauvignon. And Canon Corp represents the really big brand in Stellenbosch, and then the other video, Bosch Kloof, represents the new up-and-coming rising wave of talented younger winemakers who are doing incredible things in Stellenbosch as well.